Genetic engineering, an attack on nature, or the key to a resilient species. Imagine a world in which genetic diseases such as muscular dystrophy, HIV, and Down syndrome could all be easily cured. Considering that approximately 6% of all childbirths each year result in some form of birth defect, this could result in the improvement, if not entirely saving, of approximately 8.5 million children each year. Now, what could allow such a thing to occur? Well, genetic engineering. Now, what is genetic engineering? Essentially, it's the process of altering an organism's DNA in order to achieve a desired trait. So, most people, when they look at DNA, they see the double helix and they know that. Now, what a lot of people don't know is these lines or these base pairs essentially act as the genetic code of life. And altering even one of these base pairs could have entirely different results for an organism. This could result in fun experiments from glowing mice anywhere to amazing developments such as mosquitoes that don't carry malaria. The possibilities of this technology are essentially endless. Now, when discussing genetic engineering, it's important to understand the difference between this and natural selection, which is equally as capable of creating resilient species. In fact, according to Eric Bender, a science and technology author for Boston University, in a paper discussed the development of a certain species of moth known as the peppered moth, in which it adapted to an increasingly sooty environment by turning black in order to camouflage itself. Additionally, he described water fleas, which were able to adapt to warmer waters within urban landscapes in order to better survive. Now, while these outcomes do align with the goals of genetic engineering, it is important to realize that there are many downplays to this natural selection. For one, it is mostly uncontrollable. Even with selective breeding, we can never fully predict what will outcome. It's mostly up to nature. Additionally, it is much less reliable, and also it takes significantly more time to produce useful results than does genetic engineering, which in turn results in genetic engineering being far superior to natural selection and/or selective breeding. Now, despite all these possible advantages, an uprising question is becoming common in today's society, which is, should this technology be utilized at all? As this technology fundamentally goes against nature and what it stands for. One possible issue with this technology is that it could threaten the future autonomy of descendants. Now, according to Steven Salzberg, a professor of biomedical engineering, genetic engineering could allow parents to modify their children's hair color, eye color, even skin tone. Now, they could even allow parents to modify their children based on intelligence or athleticism. Now, while this does sound great, many, such as Mari Hari, a professor of philosophy at Alta University, argue that this is problematic, as descendants would have no choice regarding these issues. However, the problem with this claim is that it implies that descendants had a choice with these to begin with, as nature has always just played a role in deciding what the outcome of a person is. On the contrary, genetic modifications could allow parents to modify their children with beneficial traits that are indisputably good, such as good eyesight or intelligence. Additionally, this technology could allow parents to discontinue hereditary diseases that have plagued bloodlines for decades. And at this point, it becomes the question of, is it not unethical to avoid the use of this technology more than it is to use it? Another possible issue with this technology is that it could foster social inequalities. So inherently, genetic modification will be expensive in the beginning, which, according to Marihari, could result in this technology disproportionately benefiting the rich, who would be the only ones able to benefit from this kind of development. But the good news is that genetic modification really isn't that expensive anymore. With the advent of new technologies such as CRISPR-Cas9, it is extremely cheap and easy to produce genetically modified organisms. Additionally, further research in this field will only continue to drop the prices of such technology. However, even if everything is cheap, there will always be some who are unable to use it, some who are unable to modify or improve themselves. And for this, it becomes the question of what would a social situation for this individual look like? Well, it is likely that for these individuals, they would be viewed as outcasts. They would feel as if they're not welcome, which could be very problematic. Now, additionally, the modified majority could view themselves as very resilient to these genetic imperfections, which, according to Derek Lusk, a professor of business psychology at Columbia University, over-resilience has proven to provide an obsessive nature towards unobtainable standards, which could eventually become the social norm and destroy a lot of people. And my third and final issue is that the availability of gene editing could foster disaster. According to Annie C., the science journalist for the New York Times, CRISPR-Cas9 editing kits can come for as cheap as $200, which sounds like a lot, but when considering the fact that you're modifying life itself and the fact that further research will only cheapen these prices, it becomes concerning that genetic modification could allow virtually anyone to modify an organism. People could irresponsibly or accidentally modify people, plants, animals, armies, and even diseases that if they were to get back into the natural environment could result in disastrous effects. This is why genetic modification regulations would have to be established, such as the supervision of the trade and buying of these technologies, as without them, people with irresponsible or malicious intent could get hold and provide something bad. Certain types of editing could also be limited to those qualified, so maybe specifically human, animal, disease editing might be exclusively available to those who have had years and years of research in order to prevent as much of an outbreak as possible. Interestingly enough, however, there are some modification regulations that are already established. For instance, in the US, germline modification, or the modification of inheritable genes, is strictly prohibited in the US. In places like the EU, the restrictions are much more harsh, claiming that modifications are strictly for medical purposes, and in many countries in the EU, genetically modified foods are entirely banned. Now, these excessive restrictions do much less than to further restrict the research in this area, which could increase problems in the future. So in conclusion, should genetic engineering be utilized? In my opinion, absolutely. The possible effects of genetic engineering far outweigh the possible disadvantages in that it could cure thousands of previously uncurable diseases such as Huntington's or diseases that have haunted families for years that have previously been thought to have no cure. It could also greatly mitigate world hunger through genetically modified food that could produce much more food for a lot cheaper, as well as the fact that in a more idealistic approach, gene editing could allow human development on an unparalleled level, giving way to more intelligent, more athletic beings that have never been seen before. This technology could be the future. However, we just have to embrace the unnatural. Thank you.
Okay, Joshua, what information did you need that you weren't able to find or locate?
What was really hard to find was real-world examples of people utilizing this technology as with the kind of, it has a bad connotation to it in that people see it as a negative thing to modify genes, which means that a lot of research is usually very restricted to the point where it's hard to find any, like there's almost no editing done on humans. However, there was, back in 2018, I believe, this doctor in Japan modified 2 newborn babies, which striked a lot of people and was not very good.
And how is your conclusion in conversation with the body of literature or other research sources you examined?
I think my research fairly aligns with the majority of scientists. I think there's a lot of scare, but I think as the technology develops further and further, the conclusion is coming to more people that it is a good thing that we should utilize more. So I think my conclusion does align better with a lot of the majority.